Alan Hayes had never meant to dedicate his life to hunting conspiracies. At one point he dreamed of designing the ships that would take humanity to the stars, but that dream fell apart along with his aerospace career. Now, tucked away in a windowless office of worn walls and buzzing fluorescent lights, he pored over the scraps left behind by the missions that first inspired him. Old data tapes, once locked in NASA's archives, had been declassified and auctioned off as collectibles. Alan had bought dozens for pennies, convinced there were stories inside no one else cared to notice. He leaned closer to the battered playback console, adjusting the dial until the hiss of static softened enough to catch human voices. "Eagle Base, do you copy?" The transmission was faint, warped by time and magnetic decay. Alan's fingers hovered above the keyboard as the voice repeated. "Eagle Base, do you copy?" He rewound the tape again, certain he had heard something more. Between the repeated calls there was a pause, a faint, unnatural click. Alan isolated the frequency, looping it again and again. "This is not part of the script." His pulse jumped. The voice didn't sound rehearsed. There was a tremor to it, as if someone was frightened. Alan stood up, pacing in the cramped room, feeling his heart pound. "Not part of the script?" He scrawled the words on a yellow notepad. "What script?" He replayed the recording once more, this time filtering the background. Underneath, behind the usual static, something else emerged. A series of mechanical tones, like a machine trying to speak through a human system. Alan squinted, listening harder, and a cold weight settled in his stomach. There was a pattern in those tones. He copied the data, transferring it to a cleaner file on his laptop. If there was a hidden message, he'd need to decode it line by line. Alan didn't believe in fantasies about aliens landing in cornfields. But a signal buried in NASA's own records? That was different. That was real. Outside his office window, night had long fallen over Houston, the city lights stretching into a soft haze. Alan barely noticed. All he saw was the flickering waveform on his laptop. He didn't sleep. Didn't even try. By morning he'd built a rough transcript of the strange beeps and pulses. Some sections were still a jumble, but other fragments made a primitive kind of sense. Subsurface, structure, coordinates, hostile. Alan's breath caught. Subsurface structure? Hostile. He pushed away from his desk, rubbing tired eyes. Maybe it was a prank, an elaborate joke from some bored engineer in the 70s. But deep down, Alan knew these astronauts had been too disciplined for jokes, too aware the world was listening. So why had this fragment never aired on television? Why had it stayed buried? Alan closed his laptop and locked the data drive into a hidden compartment in his desk drawer. If this was genuine, it was bigger than any theory he had ever chased. He left his office without another glance at the dawn creeping through the clouds, mind racing with possibilities. Somewhere on the moon, hidden in the silence of its dusty plains, there might be something humanity was never meant to see. And Alan was going to find out what it was. Alan left his cramped office behind and headed for the small diner across the street, hoping a cup of coffee might clear his rattled mind. The neon sign outside buzzed faintly against the early morning haze, throwing harsh light across a line of tired workers waiting for breakfast. Alan picked a booth near the window, settling in with his laptop, his hands still unsteady. He replayed the fragments over and over, barely tasting the bitter coffee in front of him. The pattern of those mechanical tones refused to leave his thoughts. "Mind if I sit?" Alan looked up, startled. A man stood beside the booth, older, with a rough-edged posture that reminded him of a soldier. His hair was silver at the temples, his face deeply lined. Alan hesitated. "Do I know you?" The man gave a humorless smile. "I doubt it. My name's Thomas Ward." Alan's mind snapped to attention. Thomas Ward. The Apollo archives listed him as part of mission support, a name mentioned only briefly in forgotten transcripts. Thomas lowered himself into the seat, glancing around the diner before speaking again. "You're listening to things that should stay buried," he said, voice low. Alan swallowed. "What do you know about it?" Thomas didn't answer at first. He studied Alan the way a hawk might study a mouse, weighing whether to strike. Finally he sighed. "I was there, Alan. Not on the surface, but close enough to hear what happened. You think that tape is some conspiracy toy? It's dangerous." Alan leaned forward. "Dangerous how?" Thomas's expression darkened. "Because it isn't a story. It isn't a joke. We weren't alone up there." Alan felt a chill settle into his spine. "You mean aliens?" Thomas didn't flinch. "Call them what you want. They had structures under the regolith, and they didn't appreciate visitors. We were warned away, plain as that." Alan tried to process the words, but they sounded impossible. Yet Thomas's voice carried the weight of experience, and something in his eyes made Alan trust him despite every skeptical instinct. Thomas reached across the table, placing a folded slip of paper near Alan's coffee cup. "This is all I'll give you. Coordinates." Alan hesitated before picking it up. "Why me?" "Because you're too stubborn to leave this alone," Thomas replied. "You'll chase it no matter how many people tell you to quit." Alan let out a nervous breath, feeling the slip of paper warm in his hand. "What's waiting there?" Thomas looked out the window, the glow of traffic reflecting in his eyes. "Something humanity isn't ready for," he said. "But that never stopped us before." Before Alan could ask more, Thomas stood abruptly, straightening the worn edges of his jacket. "Watch your back," he warned, then left the diner, leaving behind only the faint smell of machine oil and a trail of questions Alan could barely form. Alan sat frozen, replaying the encounter in his mind. He opened the paper carefully. The numbers scrawled there looked like lunar coordinates, though the handwriting was jagged and uneven, as if Thomas had written it under duress. Alan closed his laptop, heart pounding, and slid out of the booth. Whatever was on the moon, he knew he could no longer pretend it was just a myth. Alan returned to his apartment with the slip of paper clenched in his fist. Sleep was out of the question. His mind replayed Thomas's voice, warning him, pushing him to quit, yet handing him coordinates anyway. He cleared off a cluttered side table and spread out old mission charts he had collected over the years. He entered the numbers into an old lunar map program, eyes scanning for a match. The result blinked onto the screen. A point near the Taurus, Littrow Valley, far from the sights the world saw on television. It matched Apollo 17's landing area, but deeper, closer to a rift marked Restricted Zone Alpha. Alan's hands trembled. What did they see down there? He needed help. Someone who could verify the data. There was only one person he trusted for that. He dialed a number from memory. "Bria?" The line crackled, then a familiar voice answered. "Alan? Do you know what time it is?" "Bria, please. I need you." Pause. Bria Martin had been Alan's closest colleague at the agency before he quit. A brilliant analyst, honest to a fault, she had always held him to a higher standard. Bria sighed. "Where are you?" He rattled off his address, barely waiting for her to confirm before hanging up. Within the hour, Bria stepped through the door, hair pulled into a loose braid, eyes sharp despite the late hour. "You look terrible," she said, setting her bag down. Alan managed a thin smile. "Good to see you too." He handed over the paper with the coordinates, then replayed the cleaned-up audio from the Apollo tapes. Bria listened without interrupting, her brow furrowed, tapping her pen on the table in a nervous rhythm. When the last mechanical tone ended, she let out a breath. "Alan, if this is real, we're talking about an entire mission being blacked out. This could rewrite history." "That's exactly why I need you," Alan said. "Help me verify it." Bria pulled out her own laptop, connecting to satellite archives that only a handful of researchers could access. Together, they began layering Apollo footage with more recent lunar scans, looking for matches. Alan felt his heart leap when the images aligned. A jagged shape, half buried near a collapsed crater wall, stuck out from the dust. The same pattern visible in the old mission film, though blurred and nearly erased. "That looks artificial," Bria whispered. Alan nodded. "NASA cut that footage, Bria. They removed every trace of this." She scrolled deeper through the data, mouth tightening. "And look at the official logs." Entire blocks of mission transcripts were missing, lines replaced with blank time stamps. Even thermal scans were oddly censored, showing sudden temperature spikes with no explanation. Alan sank back in his chair, staring at the swirl of falsified data. They hid it all. Bria closed her laptop, voice steady. "So what do we do now?" Alan met her gaze. "We go there." Bria's eyes widened. "Are you out of your mind? You want to break a quarantine on the moon?" "It isn't about quarantine," Alan said, leaning forward. "It's about truth. If Thomas is right, there's something still active under that surface." Bria was silent for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. If you're going, you'll need me." Alan felt a cold rush through his chest. Fear, excitement, something tangled between them. They were going to uncover the real reason humanity had left the moon so quickly, no matter the risk. Alan barely slept. Each time he closed his eyes, fragments of lunar coordinates and the mechanical voice replayed through his mind. Morning arrived with no relief, only a fresh knot of anxiety pulling at his ribs. Bria had crashed on his couch, wrapped in a thin blanket, laptop still open and humming beside her. She stirred when Alan started the coffee maker, rubbing her eyes. "You look worse than last night," she muttered. Alan tried to smile but couldn't find the energy. Bria, I'm serious. We have to get these files somewhere safe. If they scrub this once, they'll try again. Bria nodded, shutting her laptop with a snap. You're probably right. Let's make copies and store them off-site. Alan was about to answer when a harsh knock rattled the door. He froze, meeting Bria's wide eyes. The knock came again, harder this time. Alan Hayes? A voice called from the hall. Alan swallowed, dread gathering in his chest. Who is it? Federal Security, the voice replied. Open up. Bria shot him a panicked glance. Alan shook his head, whispering, They shouldn't know we have this. The knock turned into pounding. Mr. Hayes opened the door. Now. Alan hesitated a moment too long. The door burst inward with a loud crack, and 3 men in dark jackets flooded the apartment. The one in front, a pale man with gray hair and calm eyes, looked directly at Alan. Mr. Hayes, my name is Ivanov, he said evenly. We need to speak. Alan stepped back, trying to shield Bria. You can't just break in. Ivanov ignored him. Where is the data? Alan swallowed. What data? Ivanov nodded to one of his men who began sweeping the apartment, pulling cables from Alan's machines and stuffing hard drives into black evidence bags. Bria jumped to her feet. That's private property. The agent glanced at her with faint amusement. It is no longer private, he said without raising his voice. Alan's mind raced. If they took the only copies, it would all vanish, just like those missing hours from the mission. Ivanov stepped closer, voice dropping. You are in possession of restricted materials. This is a matter of national security. Any further action by you will be classified as a threat. Do you understand? Alan tried to steady himself. Why are you so afraid of the truth? Ivanov's eyes were cold. This is bigger than truth. This is survival. Alan felt Bria's hand on his arm, steadying him. The agents ripped through the apartment, disconnecting cables, ignoring the broken furniture and torn boxes in their path. Then, just as quickly as they had arrived, they were gone, leaving a stripped apartment and silence behind. Alan slumped against the wall, breathing hard. Bria knelt beside him. Alan, they took everything. He shook his head slowly. Not everything. He reached into the lining of his coat and pulled out a tiny flash drive hidden in a stitched pocket. Bria let out a shaky laugh. You backed it up? Alan nodded. They don't get to erase history. Bria straightened, resolve sharpening her face. Then we keep going. Alan rose to his feet, looking out through the broken door. Beyond the cracked threshold, the city carried on as if nothing had happened, but he felt the ground shifting under him. They had crossed a line. There was no turning back. Alan and Bria kept moving. They left the ruined apartment behind, using a burner phone to arrange a cheap motel room on the outskirts of town. The place smelled like stale air, but it was quiet and no one asked questions. Bria checked the lock twice before sitting on the bed, her shoulders tense. They're going to come back, she said. Alan nodded, setting down the tiny flash drive. That's why we need help. Bria frowned. Help from who? Alan hesitated. Only one name came to mind. Thomas. Bria sighed when he said it. He told you to stop. And now you want to drag him back in? Alan paced across the stained carpet. He's the only one who's seen this up close. He knows more than he told me. Bria opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. After a moment she stood. All right. Let's find him. They reached out through old contacts, piecing together where Thomas might have gone. After hours of calls and coded messages, they tracked him to a quiet veterans shelter near Galveston, a place where no one asked about the past. Alan spotted Thomas seated on a metal bench, staring out toward the sea. The older man looked even more worn than before, as if the years had dragged him down like an anchor. Thomas didn't look surprised to see them. I told you to walk away, he said, not turning around. Alan stepped closer. They came for us. They took everything. If you ever wanted the truth out there, now is the time. Thomas shook his head. I'm not sure the world deserves it. Bria spoke gently. People can handle more than you think. Thomas exhaled, slow and deep, then finally met their eyes. You don't understand what's buried under that dust, he said. It's a hangar. Big enough to hold 100 ships. Alien ships. Alan froze. Ships. Thomas nodded. They left them behind. Machines waiting to be woken up. We were never supposed to find them, but Apollo stumbled on the entrance. Bria's voice was faint. That's why they cut the transmissions. Exactly. Thomas's hands trembled as he spoke. There was an entity, you'd call it? It made contact through our headsets. Warned us. Said the surface was off limits. Told us to go home. Alan ran a hand through his hair. So why give me those coordinates if you want it hidden? Thomas looked out at the horizon, eyes misty. Because I'm tired of carrying this alone, he whispered. Someone has to know before the wrong people reactivate that place. Bria took a careful breath. Do you think they'll ever come back? Thomas's jaw tightened. If those ships wake up, they won't need to. They'll be here. Alan felt a cold weight settle in his gut. Then we need to see it for ourselves. Thomas turned back, studying them with a grave calm. If you go, there's no rescue. No help. You'll be alone. Alan nodded. That's still better than letting this stay buried. Thomas rose, joints creaking, and pressed a small patch of cloth into Alan's hand. Embroidered on it was an old Apollo mission emblem, but with new coordinates stitched by hand along the edge. Use this, Thomas said. It'll get you closer than any map. Bria reached for Alan's arm, steadying him. We'll go together, she told Thomas. Thomas gave a tired nod, eyes full of old regret. Then God help you both, he murmured. The sea breeze rattled the bench, and for a moment the three of them stood in silence, each weighed down by what waited beyond the stars. Alan stared at the mission patch Thomas had given him. The hand-stitched coordinates felt heavier than any piece of fabric should. He tucked it carefully into his jacket, then looked at Bria. We'll need a ship, he said. Bria raised an eyebrow. You make it sound easy. Alan gave a thin smile. No other option. It took a week of quiet planning, calling in old favors and leaning on Bria's discreet contacts, but they managed to book passage on a private lunar cargo shuttle. The company billed it as a maintenance flight to survey abandoned Apollo gear, perfect cover. They boarded under false names, carrying little beyond their suits, oxygen packs, and the precious drive Alan still kept hidden under layers of code. Bria secured their seat harnesses as the ship shuddered through ignition. Once we land, she reminded him, we stick to the plan. No wandering off. Alan nodded, though his mind was already miles ahead, racing with questions. The flight burned through Earth orbit and arced toward the moon, its engines a constant low roar that rattled Alan's bones. Hours blurred as they drifted through the blackness, a silence so complete it felt like standing on the edge of forever. Finally the ship's comm crackled. Approaching Tranquility Outpost, the pilot announced. Bria checked their packs again. You ready? Alan nodded. As I'll ever be. The shuttle landed with a controlled bounce on a battered landing pad. Lunar dust sprayed in graceful arcs, settling like a slow snowfall. The crew disembarked, busy with routine equipment checks. Alan and Bria slipped away in the confusion, moving past faded flags and old rover tracks until they reached the open plain beyond. Alan unfolded the cloth patch, tracing the numbers with a gloved finger. This way, he said, pointing toward a jagged ridge beyond the mapped survey zone. They moved carefully over uneven ground, bouncing in reduced gravity, each step stirring a haze of gray dust. A deep crack in the crater wall appeared ahead, half hidden by shadows. Bria paused. It matches Thomas's description, she whispered. Alan stepped closer, scanning the gap with a portable scanner. Weak signals echoed back, barely registering, as if something inside absorbed every trace of energy. They descended together, boots scraping along fractured stone, until the tunnel opened into a vast cavity. Alan's visor lights swept across smooth walls, strange symbols etched in patterns that made no human sense. Bria's voice trembled. It's real. Alan couldn't look away. The structure was immense, clearly artificial, stretching into darkness. Beyond its threshold, faint shapes waited, rows of enormous vessels, dark and silent, built for purposes they could only guess. Alan felt his heart pound. They left this behind, he murmured. Bria stepped beside him, shining her lamp toward a panel of controls, metal older than any civilization on Earth yet still intact. Whatever they were, she said, they didn't plan on sharing? Alan nodded. Which means someone tried to keep us from ever seeing it. He looked out over the silent ships, uneasy at the quiet that surrounded them. It felt like stepping into a museum built for a war that had never ended. Bria touched his arm, her voice steady. We need to document everything, Alan. Before anyone else comes. Alan swallowed, bracing himself. Let's get to work. They stepped forward together, crossing the line between human myth and alien truth. Alan and Bria stepped deeper into the immense chamber, their helmet lamps slicing through the gloom. The alien ships stood row upon row, their dark hulls marked by unfamiliar symbols that felt too precise to be random. Alan couldn't help studying the lines, wondering if they told a story or a warning. Bria paused beside a central structure that rose from the floor like a massive arch, tall enough for a shuttle to pass through. Strange conduits snaked from its base, pulsing with a faint blue glow, still alive after decades or maybe centuries. Alan swallowed. "That's a gate," he whispered. Bria swept her scanner across the arch. "It's giving off an active field. Maybe a portal or a transport system." Alan stepped closer, studying the way its metal shimmered under their lights. There was a sense of impossible craftsmanship in every line, flawless in a way no human weld or rivet could match. Bria reached out, fingertips hovering inches from the panel. "If we trigger it?" Alan turned sharply. "No. We don't know what's on the other side." Her expression was firm. "We came here to learn, Alan." He hesitated, mind racing with the consequences. Still, the pull of truth outweighed his fear. "All right," he said quietly. "But let me record everything first." They set up a remote camera, sending images back to a secured recorder in the cargo shuttle. If anything happened, at least there would be proof left behind. Bria drew a slow breath, then placed her hand on a glowing panel beside the arch. A low vibration hummed through the chamber. Alan felt it in his bones, a subtle tremor that seemed to reach into the walls themselves. The arch flared with light, blue and white swirling like a captured storm. Then it stabilized, revealing a hazy surface within, rippling as if it waited for something to pass through. Alan stepped forward, pulse hammering. Through the haze he saw a shape moving, tall and unmistakably bipedal. Its silhouette sharpened until he could make out details. A slender figure, impossibly tall, with features that echoed human form but carried a strange symmetry that made it otherworldly. It stepped through the gate without hesitation, its motion fluid and calm. Alan and Bria froze. The being raised a hand in what almost looked like a greeting. Its voice, calm and musical, echoed inside their comms. "Humans," it said. "At last." Alan swallowed hard. "Who are you?" The being tilted its head, a graceful motion. "I am Sorvin. I watched you from afar, waiting for your courage to surpass your fear." Bria stepped closer. "You've been expecting us?" Sorvin nodded. "Long before your world could reach beyond its orbit. We placed the warning to keep you away until you were prepared." Alan's mind reeled. Prepared for what? Sorvin's gaze swept over the rows of silent ships. Prepared to understand the gate. To stand with others in the stars rather than hide on a single world. Bria's voice was tight. "Why now?" Sorvin paused as if weighing something unspoken. "Because others will come. Not all who travel these paths seek peace." Alan felt a chill run down his spine. "You mean an invasion?" Sorvin inclined its head slightly. "Conflict is a constant in the cosmos. Your world must choose its place. This gate is the beginning." Alan took a step closer. "And if we refuse?" The being's voice grew softer. "Then you will face them alone." The swirl of the portal brightened behind Sorvin, casting its features in silver highlights. Bria met Alan's eyes, fear and wonder tangled in her expression. Alan tightened his grip on his scanner. "Then I guess we need to learn," he said. Sorvin extended a graceful hand toward them. "Come. Let me show you what lies beyond your moon." Alan drew a breath, aware that every choice from this moment forward would carry weight beyond anything he could imagine. He looked to Bria, nodded once and stepped through the gate. Alan felt a strange weightlessness as he stepped through the gate, like falling through water that had no end. His helmet display blinked and glitched, then reset, showing an environment his mind could barely process. The light around them pulsed in shifting colors, too vivid and precise to belong to Earth. Alan steadied himself on a metal platform that floated in empty air, surrounded by enormous structures, towers, bridges, and spires that seemed to fold and unfold like breathing machinery. Bria emerged behind him, voice tight in his comms. "Alan, you seeing this?" He nodded, though he could barely focus on any one detail before another drew his eye. It felt alive but not in a way he could describe. Sorvin stood a short distance away, framed against a backdrop of spiraling towers. "Welcome," he said with a calm patience. "This is one of our threshold realms." Alan took a step forward. "Where are we?" Sorvin motioned for them to follow. "Between systems. A bridge for travelers built to keep their worlds connected." Bria scanned the area with her portable reader. "There's a gravity field here, but I can't get a reading on anything else." Sorvin seemed amused. "Your instruments were not made to measure this place. But your minds can learn." Alan felt an uneasy curiosity. "Why show us this?" Sorvin's expression grew more serious. "Because you must understand what stands at your door." The ships you found are only a fraction of what travels the stars. Some seek trade, some knowledge. Others, he paused, choosing his words. Others take. Bria folded her arms. You mean they'll attack us? Sorvin inclined his head. If you are not prepared. They will not ask permission. Alan clenched his fists. And you want us to fight them? Sorvin shook his head. Not fight. Stand with allies. Share the gate and you will gain friends. Close it and you will face them alone. Alan swallowed. The stakes felt enormous. Why help us at all? Sorvin looked at them with something close to compassion. Because your kind is still growing. Your courage drew our respect. We have watched you survive a world that often turned on you, yet you keep reaching outward. Bria looked around the vast threshold, then back at Alan. If what you say is true, we have no time. Sorvin gestured again and a section of the floor shifted, revealing a series of images, star maps, signals, waveforms Alan couldn't fully read. These, Sorvin explained, are the signatures of those who travel toward your system now. You must decide what to tell your people and how. Alan stared at the incomprehensible data, then back at the alien figure. If we expose the gate, it could tear apart everything on Earth. But hiding it means leaving us defenseless. Sorvin nodded, calm and resigned. There is risk in every path. But no path leads back to how things were. Bria touched Alan's sleeve. He's right, she said softly. We can't unsee this. Alan exhaled, steadying himself against the flow of light. Then we plan, he decided. We'll tell them enough. And we'll be ready if these visitors aren't friendly. Sorvin studied him with that same quiet patience. Then you have chosen the harder road, he said. It may save you. Alan nodded. Then help us build the message. Help us tell the truth. Sorvin raised one hand and the walls around them seemed to shimmer, drawing up vast displays of knowledge. Weapons, history, language, alliances. Bria let out a stunned laugh. Alan, it's a library. A cosmic library. Alan stared, overwhelmed but no longer afraid. Let's start reading, he said. Alan stood before the massive lattice of data Sorvin had revealed. It pulsed with shifting glyphs and images that tried to reorganize themselves into something his human eyes could understand. Bria was beside him, scanning line after line of signals, her face lit by a kaleidoscope of alien patterns. These are star routes, she murmured, pointing to a cluster of geometric arcs. Trade corridors. Some marked as dangerous. Alan nodded, trying to take it all in. And these? He asked, indicating a field of symbols orbiting a red hexagon. Sorvin stepped closer. That is a warning. Those signals belong to species who will see your world as prey. Bria swallowed. So they are coming. Sorvin inclined his head. Unless you close the gate or learn to stand among allies. That is your choice. Alan felt the weight of it settle over him. If we close the gate, they'll try to break through somewhere else, he reasoned. Correct, Sorvin answered. But you would delay their arrival. Perhaps long enough for your people to prepare. Alan clenched a fist. Or, he went on, we keep the gate open, reveal everything, and hope humanity can unite before they arrive. Sorvin regarded him with an almost sorrowful look. Humans are capable of greatness, but also quick to turn on one another. Alan stared at the swirling data. He could imagine the panic on Earth, the politicians, the military scrambling, all desperate to control the gate rather than share it. And yet, if they did nothing, it was only a matter of time before someone forced it open anyway. Bria touched his shoulder. Alan, you can't carry this alone, she said quietly. He nodded, letting out a steadying breath. No, we have to tell them. But on our terms. Enough truth to rally them, but not so much that they destroy themselves fighting over it. Sorvin considered this. That is a dangerous balance, he warned. Alan looked the alien directly in the eye. Better than leaving them in the dark. Bria stepped closer, folding her arms. Then we start with the signal. Broadcast a piece of it. A warning and a chance. Alan felt something close to resolve, if not peace. We'll use our own satellites, he said. Push the message to every government, every scientist, every citizen who might listen. Sorvin nodded, respectful. If you choose that path, I will stand with you. Alan took one last glance at the data arrays, their symbols shifting like tides. Then let's go home, he said. And get ready. Bria smiled, weary but firm. This time we do it together. As the threshold began to dim, Sorvin raised a hand, the same calm authority in his voice. Know this, once you reveal the gate, you are part of the cosmos. There is no turning back. Alan took a breath and nodded. I wouldn't want to turn back. They stepped through the gate once more, leaving the threshold realm behind. Alan's mind was full of images, names, strange languages and terrifying coordinates, but one thought rang louder than the rest: the world would never be the same. Alan stepped off the gangway of the lunar shuttle with Bria at his side. The cargo hold hummed behind them, full of crates, but Alan's thoughts were on the flash drive hidden in his suit lining. It held the recording, the coordinates, and the first fragments of the cosmic archive Sorvin had shown them. Bria stayed close, scanning the dock for security. "You think they'll come for us again?" Alan shook his head. "Maybe. But they'll have a harder time stopping us now." Back on Earth, the world had kept turning, oblivious to what they had seen. That ignorance wouldn't last. Alan's mind replayed Sorvin's warning: no path leads back. They moved quickly through the inspection checkpoint, handing off forged credentials. Once past, Alan found a quiet corner and connected his comms pack to the ship's external array. Bria checked the data. "We go with the condensed version?" Alan nodded. The coordinates, a partial scan of the alien ships and Sorvin's voice. "It's enough to prove what's coming without sparking chaos." She gave him a thin smile. "Or at least to buy us a little time." He uploaded the first burst, fingers shaking only slightly as he pushed the transmit command. The data packet streaked out through the comm relay, fanning toward every open channel on Earth. "This is Alan Hayes," he recorded, voice steady. "The moon landings were not a hoax, but they were a cover. We found something buried there, and what we found has consequences far beyond one planet. We are not alone, and we have never been alone." Bria leaned in, adding her own voice. "What you will see is real. You must decide what to do with it. Together." They finished the message, sealed the drive, and triggered the final broadcast. Alan shut off the relay and stood in silence. The world would know. They had made sure no one could bury it again. Bria took his arm, guiding him back toward the shuttle's forward bay. "Now we wait," she said. Alan looked at her, gratitude and worry fighting for space in his chest. "Whatever comes through next," he said, "we face it together." Bria nodded. "Always." They stepped out under the harsh lunar lights, staring at the dark horizon where the Earth floated like a silent guardian. Alan thought of Sorvin's promise, of the allies who might answer, and the enemies who certainly would. There was no hiding anymore. But there was a kind of freedom in that, the knowledge that their small blue world was finally ready to stand among the stars for better or worse. As the hatch behind them sealed, Alan looked back one last time at the ridged gray landscape, ancient and waiting. It felt like the beginning of something far bigger than any mission patch, bigger than any secret. The future had arrived.